They called it the Demogorgon. In November of 1983, in a basement in Hawkins, Indiana, 4 boys playing Dungeons and Dragons rolled dice against a monster their dungeon master had named after something from the game. When the real horror came, the faceless thing from the Upside Down, the name stuck. And 40 years later, millions of people now know the word Demogorgon. They picture a pale humanoid creature, something like a man-shaped orchid of teeth, hunting through darkness, drawn by blood. They named it well. They named it after something far, far worse. The creature from Stranger Things is a predator. It hunts, it kills, it drags victims into its dimension. But it is, fundamentally, an animal. A terrifying animal, yes, but an animal nonetheless. Operating on instinct, drawn to blood like a shark. More natural disaster than malevolent intelligence. What the Duffer Brothers borrowed was a name. What that name belonged to, in the source material they loved, is not a creature. It is a prince. The Prince of Demons. An 18-foot-tall abomination with 2 heads that despise each other, ruling over a layer of the abyss so chaotic that reality itself screams in his presence. The Stranger Things. Demogorgon can kill a few teenagers in a small Indiana town. The D&D Demogorgon can shatter your sanity by existing near you. He has toppled kingdoms. He has corrupted civilizations. He has waged war across dimensions for longer than most mortal species have existed. Let me tell you about the real one. The first thing that strikes those unfortunate enough to witness the Prince of Demons is his utterly alien form. Rising 18 feet tall, Demogorgon possesses a body that seems designed by madness itself. The torso resembles that of a great ape, powerful and muscular, yet possessing an unnatural flexibility, like that of a serpent. Scales cover the flesh in patterns that shift color depending on the light. Blues and greens that remind you of something rotting in tropical water, iridescent in ways that hurt to perceive. His lower body is decidedly reptilian, with massive saurian legs ending in clawed feet capable of crushing stone. A thick, forked tail whips behind him, not merely a limb, but a weapon that can batter down fortifications, or worse, drain the life force from any creature it strikes, leaving withered husks where warriors once stood. But it is the heads that truly define this abomination. 2 serpentine necks emerge from those massive shoulders, each crowned with a head resembling those of mandrills or baboons. Simian visages with elongated snouts, cruel fangs, and eyes that burn with predatory intelligence and bottomless hunger. The heads are constantly moving, constantly watching, and they never look at the same thing at the same time. One tracks the horizon, while the other examines something at its feet. One stares at a petitioner, while the other watches the door behind them. These are not just appendages. They are separate consciousnesses. The left head is called Amul, the more calculating and charismatic of the pair, relishing deception and long-term schemes. Amul thinks in centuries, willing to sacrifice generations of progress for advantages that won't mature for generations more. The right head bears the name Hethradaya, an impulsive and savage consciousness that revels in immediate violence and destruction. Where Amul builds, Hethradaya burns. Where Amul seduces, Hephrodia terrorizes. They cannot agree on anything. They undermine each other constantly. They have literally tried to kill each other, even though doing so would destroy them both. And then there are the arms. Or rather, what should be arms. Instead of limbs, 2 massive tentacles writhe from each shoulder, 4 in total. Each appendage is thick as a man's thigh, ending not in hands, but in sucking mouths capable of crushing armor and rending flesh. But the physical damage is almost incidental. These tentacles secrete a substance that rots away almost any material they touch. Armor dissolves, stone crumbles, and flesh necrotizes on contact. Worse still, they possess an unholy ability to drain the very essence of life from those they grasp, transferring vitality directly to their master. One touch, and your sanity begins to unravel. Extended contact, and you're not fighting for your life anymore. You're fighting for your identity, for your ability to remember that you ever were a person at all. The entire form seems to shift and waver when observed directly, as if Demogorgon exists partially outside the boundaries of normal perception. To look upon the Prince of Demons is to feel one's mind begin to unravel, to hear whispers in languages that predate thought itself, to glimpse impossible geometries that should not exist. The stranger things. Monster has no such presence. It is, as I said, an animal. Terrifying, but simple. The D&D Demogorgon is something else entirely. And to understand what, we need to explore where he came from. The true origins of Demogorgon remain shrouded in mystery and contradiction, with multiple legends competing to explain how such a monstrosity came to be. This is the abyss, after all. Truth itself is a casualty of the endless chaos. But there are stories. There are always stories. And what makes this uncertainty particularly noteworthy is that both major origin stories come from authoritative sources within the lore of the abyss itself, suggesting that perhaps both contain elements of truth, or that the nature of the abyss defies simple linear understanding of time and causality. The first, and perhaps most widely accepted origin, claims that Demogorgon was the very first tanar'ri demon ever created. In the primordial age before the current order of demons, the abyss was ruled by beings called Obyrith, alien, incomprehensible entities that predated the gods themselves. These creatures were even more bizarre and terrible than modern demons, their forms and minds so fundamentally wrong that mortal perception could barely process their existence. The greatest of the Obyrith lords was the Queen of Chaos, an entity of such power and malevolence that her very name inspired terror throughout the plains. She discovered that the souls of chaotic evil mortals, when they entered the abyss, could be shaped and transformed into a new type of demon. Creatures more cunning and dangerous than the mindless chaos of the Obyrith. She began experimenting with these mortal souls, using powerful servitors called echolids to craft them into tanar'ri. According to this legend, Demogorgon was her very first creation, formed from the consolidated primal fears of mortal souls. But something went wrong, or perhaps too right. The creature that emerged was twisted and deformed, with boneless tentacles for arms and 2 heads that constantly fought with each other. The Queen of Chaos deemed him a failure, an abortion of evil that did not meet her standards. and cast him aside into the forgotten depths of the abyss. There, in exile and isolation, Demogorgon festered and grew strong. While the Queen of Chaos perfected her techniques and created more refined demons, including, eventually, Orcus and other demon lords, Demogorgon remained hidden, nurturing his power and his resentment. He watched from the shadows as the queen raised up Miska the wolf spider to be her champion and general, bestowing upon him the title of Prince of Demons after she murdered the previous holder of that title, the Oberith Lord Obox Ob. The Queen of Chaos launched a massive war to conquer the multiverse, her forces of Oberith and Tanar'ri sweeping across the plains. But her ambitions were checked by the Wind Dukes of Akka, powerful beings of elemental law who opposed her chaos. In a climactic battle, Miska was imprisoned in the legendary Rod of 7 Parts, and the Queen of Chaos was driven back and defeated. This created a power vacuum. With both Miska and the Queen of Chaos out of the picture, Demon Lords Orcus and Grazist immediately began warring with each other for the right to claim the title of Prince of Demons. The entire abyss watched the struggle, certain that one of these two powerful lords would emerge victorious. That's when Demogorgon struck. Having grown immensely powerful during his long exile, the forgotten first tanar'ri emerged from the depths in a rampage of destruction. He launched a massive assault across the abyss, crushing the forces of his rivals, enslaving a dozen demon lords in brutal combat, draining their life essences with his tentacles and adding their power to his own. His fury and might were so overwhelming that even Orcus and Grazist were forced to bend the knee and acknowledge him as the Prince of Demons. But there is a second origin story, equally well attested in certain sources, that paints an entirely different picture. According to this legend, Demogorgon was not originally a demon at all, but rather a primordial, one of the ancient elemental beings that existed before the gods and helped shape the fundamental forces of the cosmos. In this version, Demogorgon was the very first primordial to set foot in the abyss, shortly after the formation of that infinite plane. He was followed closely by Dagon, another aquatic primordial of immense power, and the two engaged in a titanic struggle for control of the realm. Their battle shook the foundations of the nascent abyss, reshaping entire layers with the force of their conflict. But while Demogorgon and Dagon fought, the Oberith Lord Obox Ob seized the opportunity to claim the abyss for himself, declaring himself the first Prince of Demons. Faced with this new threat, an uneasy alliance was formed between Demogorgon, Orcus, and Bahamut, yes, the Platinum Dragon God himself, to defeat Obox Ob and drive him from power. It was during these ancient conflicts that Demogorgon gained his distinctive dual-headed nature. According to this legend, he originally possessed a single head until a blow from the primordial Amoth split it cleanly in two. Rather than dying from the wound, Demogorgon survived, and each half of his head developed into a separate conscious entity, thus creating Amul and Hethrodaya. Soon after the transformation, Demogorgon defeated another primordial named Storalk, a being of living stone. But rather than simply destroying his enemy, Demogorgon devised a more cruel fate. He imprisoned Storalk beneath his throne and performed a dark ritual that linked the primordial to the entire race of Ettins, two-headed giants. Through this connection, every time an Ettin anywhere in the multiverse experiences pain, that agony is transferred directly to Storalk, ensuring the primordial suffers eternal torment. Both versions of Demogorgon's origin share certain key elements: his immense age, his eventual triumph over Orcus and Grazist to claim the title of Prince of Demons, and his status as one of the most ancient and powerful beings in the Abyss. Both accounts also explain the presence of Obox Ob, the Oberith who preceded Demogorgon as Prince of Demons and who still plots to reclaim that title. Some scholars suggest that both stories may be true in their own way, that perhaps Demogorgon was indeed a primordial who descended into the Abyss, where his essence was transformed by the plane's corrupting influence and merged with the primal fears of mortal souls, creating something that was neither purely primordial nor purely demonic, but a horrifying synthesis of both. Which version is true? Probably none of them. Probably all of them. This is the Abyss. Truth is whatever hurts the most. Now compare this to the Stranger Things version. That creature has no origin story beyond it comes from the upside down. No history, no mythology, no weight of eons. The D&D Demogorgon carries the burden of cosmic history, the fall of the Queen of Chaos, the imprisonment of Miska, the defeat of primordials, the enslaving of demon lords. He is not just a monster. He is a consequence. The result of failures and betrayals and cosmic violence stretching back to before the gods had names. The Stranger Things. Demogorgon is a threat. The D&D Demogorgon is a history lesson written in blood and madness. Let me describe where he lives, because the realm tells you as much about its master as any account of his deeds. Demogorgon rules from the 88th layer of the Abyss, a realm known as the Gaping Maw, sometimes called the Brine Flats. The layer perfectly reflects its master's dual nature and serves as both his fortress and his laboratory, a place where reality itself seems infected by his madness. The realm consists of two primary environments that exist in uneasy balance. The first is a vast primordial jungle that covers enormous land masses, a steaming, ancient wilderness filled with dangers both natural and supernatural. This jungle, sometimes called the Screaming Jungle, is populated by troglodytes who worship Demogorgon as Amul Ibor, the sibilant beast. They share the fetid darkness with savage lizard folk tribes, Hezru demons that lumber through the undergrowth, and Yuan Ti, who know him as Siosivash. Demonic dinosaurs crash through the vegetation. Dire apes howl from the canopy, and the vegetation itself seems twisted and wrong, plants that move with disturbing purpose and emit sounds that drive visitors to madness. The trees whisper secrets to each other in languages that predate spoken word. The flowers bloom in colors that damage the eyes that perceive them. The second environment is an endless ocean of briny water beneath a sky of perpetual yellow mist and roiling storm clouds. This is no ordinary sea. The water is turbid and thick, tasting of salt and corruption. It is broken by countless rocky promontories that jut from the depths like teeth of some impossibly vast monster. These sharp, ugly stone formations rise straight from the water, many topped with twin rookeries, or structures that mirror Demogorgon's own palace in miniature. At the edge of the jungle where it meets the briny ocean lie the Brine Flats, extensive swamps that serve as a transitional zone between land and sea. Here, in these fetid marshes, Demogorgon maintains a fortress called Ungorth Reddick, a massive stronghold housing his armies of Hezru, aboleths, scrags, kuotoa, and various ichthyoid creatures. Also at the jungle's edge stands Lemuriax, the layer's only significant city and one of the most notorious locations in the entire Abyss. The crumbling metropolis is dotted with ancient ziggurats and step pyramids, home to tens of thousands of savage demons who engage in constant warfare and ritual sacrifice. Lemuriax serves as one of the multiverse's premier slave markets, where beings from across the planes are bought and sold. Demogorgon himself occasionally climbs to the top of the tallest pyramid to bellow blasphemous proclamations that echo across his realm. But the true heart of the Gaping Maw lies in the ocean, approximately 100 miles from the shores of Lemuriax. There, rising from the depths, stands Abysm, Demogorgon's palace and the seat of his power. Abysm is an architectural impossibility. It consists of 2 serpentine towers, each shaped roughly like a tightly coiled snake, their surfaces covered with sharp, fin-like projections, spines, and other cruel features. The towers spiral around each other like serpents in combat, never quite touching. They are crowned at their peaks with enormous minarets shaped like screaming skulls, one for each of Demogorgon's heads. Near the top, a bridge connects the 2 towers, though few have ever crossed it and lived to tell the tale. One tower belongs to Amul. One tower belongs to Hithrodaya. The architecture of each reflects its master. Amul's tower is labyrinthine, full of hidden passages and secret chambers and rooms that exist only sometimes. Hithrodaya's tower is brutal, its walls stained with the evidence of violence, its corridors designed not for navigation, but for the pursuit of victims who have already lost. But here is what makes Abysm truly terrifying. The towers extend not just upward, but impossibly far downward, plunging deep beneath the ocean floor. The underwater portions form a vast labyrinth of dark, cold caverns and passages that spiral down and down through the bedrock of the layer. The architecture is twisted and non-Euclidean, with staircases that loop back on themselves, corridors that should be parallel but somehow intersect, and rooms whose dimensions shift depending on the observer's mental state. The towers extend so deep that they actually connect to the layer beneath the Gaping Maw, the Shadow Sea, the 89th layer of the Abyss, which is ruled by the Obireth Lord Dagon. Through these connections, Dagon visits Demogorgon, advising each of his heads separately and playing a dangerous game of manipulation that has somehow maintained their alliance for eons. Dagon tells each head what it wants to hear, subtly encouraging their conflict. Some scholars speculate that Dagon is manipulating Demogorgon, keeping him divided against himself to prevent the Prince of Demons from becoming too powerful. Yet Dagon has had opportunities to betray Demogorgon and has not taken them, suggesting either genuine loyalty or a scheme so long-term that its endpoint remains obscure. The reefs and caverns surrounding Abysm are home to some of Demogorgon's most faithful servants. Aboleths, ancient fish-like creatures of terrible intelligence, lurk in the depths, constantly plotting and scheming. Kraken of immense size prowl the waters, their tentacles capable of dragging entire ships into the depths. Most importantly, the Ixitsachitl, intelligent evil manta rays who serve as Demogorgon's chosen race, patrol the waters in vast schools, their very presence poisoning the sea with malevolence. These three factions constantly war with each other even as they worship Demogorgon above in his palace, their conflicts providing entertainment for their master. The environment within Abysm itself is perhaps even more dangerous than the creatures that inhabit it. The maddening presence of Demogorgon infuses the structure with powerful latent magical effects that manifest spontaneously. Hallways might suddenly fill with magical darkness so complete that even dark vision fails. Illusory copies of Demogorgon might appear around corners to terrify and confuse intruders. Lizards, snakes, and other poisonous creatures spontaneously generate in the corridors, birthed from nothing by the prince's ambient malevolence. The very stones seem to whisper secrets that no mortal mind should comprehend. Beasts that enter the fortress are driven aggressive and insane, attacking anything they encounter with suicidal fury. Humanoids who linger too long in Abysm find their thoughts become increasingly disordered, their perceptions warping, their memories fragmenting. Many who have entered seeking to confront Demogorgon have instead become lost in the twisting passages, eventually succumbing to madness and becoming permanent residents of the palace. Mindless servants of its master, stumbling through corridors they no longer recognize, mumbling prayers to heads that never answer. The Stranger Things. Upside Down is eerie. It's dark. It has particles floating in the air and organic architecture that suggests alien biology. The Gaping Maw is a dimension-sized torture chamber with its own slave markets, its own cities, its own species that have evolved to worship the thing that rules them. The comparison almost feels unfair. Now let's talk about what Demogorgon can do, because this is where the gap between the two versions becomes an abyss of its own. The Stranger Things version can open portals. It can sense blood. It can kill with its petal-like face of teeth. Frightening abilities for a monster in a horror show. The D&D Demogorgon can end civilizations. His tentacles don't just hit, they drain. One touch, and your sanity begins to unravel. Your sense of self dissolves. Your memories become uncertain. The sage Delrith, who claimed to have observed Demogorgon from a safe distance through powerful scrying magic, and who vanished 6 months after publishing his observations, described the tentacles this way. They do not seek to harm. Harm is incidental. They seek to introduce. Each touch is an introduction to a new way of thinking, a new way of being, a new way of losing everything you thought you were. I watched a paladin of impeccable faith be touched for 3 seconds. He spent the remaining 40 years of his life trying to remember his god's name. His gazes are worse, and each head has a different one. Hethridia's gaze can drive creatures into states of utter confusion and madness, causing them to attack allies, flee in terror, or simply stand catatonic as their minds fracture. Those affected might spend hours screaming at walls or clawing at their own faces, convinced they need to remove something that isn't there. Amul's gaze is even more insidious. It implants a second personality in victims, a dormant consciousness loyal to Demogorgon himself. This false personality lies hidden, sometimes for years, until activated. At that point, it seizes control and turns the victim into an unwitting spy or assassin. Imagine discovering that someone you've trusted for a decade, someone you've fought beside, has carried a fragment of the Prince of Demons inside them the entire time. Imagine discovering that person is yourself. He can use both gazes simultaneously, directing them at different targets. One eye locks your companion in place, puppet strings their body for Demogorgon's purposes. The other drives you insane, and all the while, those tentacles are reaching, draining, unmaking. His tail is equally deadly, delivering devastating physical blows enhanced by necrotic energy that continues to damage victims long after the initial impact. The forked appendage can strike with serpentine speed, making it nearly impossible to dodge. He regenerates from almost any wound. He can cast spells that would challenge archmages, magic that bends reality, magic that tears open wounds between dimensions. He possesses the rare ability to plane shift, allowing him to travel between layers of the abyss or even to other planes entirely. This makes him capable of appearing almost anywhere if he desires. And then there's the effect that no stats can fully capture. His mere presence corrodes sanity. You don't have to look at him. You don't have to be touched by him. Just existing near Demogorgon is enough to start the slow slide into madness. Your thoughts become strange. Your perception warps. Colors seem wrong. Shadows move when they shouldn't. You find yourself thinking in patterns that aren't your own. A survivor, one of the few, described it. I was never in his throne room. I was never touched by his servants. I was held in a cell in the outer reaches of Abysm for 6 days. Just 6 days. By the 3rd day, I had stopped being certain that I existed. By the 5th, I had stopped wanting to. The walls weren't just stone. They were watching. The air wasn't just air. It was thinking. When they let me go, and I still don't know why they let me go, I couldn't remember my own name for a month. Even now, 20 years later, I sometimes look in the mirror and see something with 2 heads looking back. When Demogorgon is truly threatened, he can perform a devastating final action, creating a massive force wave that draws all nearby creatures into his body, consuming them utterly. Beings destroyed this way cannot be resurrected by any means. They're not merely killed, but erased, their essence incorporated into Demogorgon himself. This ability ensures that even defeating him comes at a terrible cost, as he will drag his killers down with him. The Prince of Demons is also extraordinarily creative and relishes experimentation. His realm is littered with the results of his work. Hybrid creatures combining multiple species, constructs animated by captured souls, cursed artifacts that spread his influence. He created the Dread Forge, a magical anvil capable of transforming dinosaurs into thinking reptilian humanoids through blood sacrifice. He maintains vast libraries in Abysm containing knowledge from 1,000 worlds, though the books themselves are often bound in skin and written in blood, and reading them without proper protections risks madness. The Stranger Things. Demogorgon is the scariest thing in its fictional Indiana town. The D&D Demogorgon is one of the scariest things in a multiverse that contains literal infinite dimensions of horror. But power alone doesn't explain why Demogorgon matters. The Abyss is full of powerful beings. What makes the Prince of Demons special is his position, and the war he has waged to keep it. The title of Prince of Demons is not hereditary. It's not elected. It's not officially granted by any authority. It's earned through one simple criterion: Whoever the other demon lords fear most holds the title. And for as long as anyone can remember, that being has been Demogorgon. His greatest rival is Orcus, the demon prince of undeath. Their hatred for each other is legendary throughout the plains, animosity so deep and fundamental that it transcends mere competition for power. Where Demogorgon represents madness, chaos, and the corruption of the living mind, Orcus embodies death, undeath, and the perversion of mortality itself. They are opposites in many ways, yet similar in their ambition and cruelty. The two have warred across the abyss for eons. Their armies have clashed in battles that killed millions of demons on each side. And sometimes, Orcus has won. He once actually succeeded in killing Demogorgon, destroyed the body, scattered the essence, claimed the victory that had eluded him for so long. For a brief time, Orcus believed he was finally, truly, the Prince of Demons. But death is different for demon lords. They reform, they return, and when Demogorgon returned from that particular death, his vengeance was biblical. He didn't just attack Orcus, he attacked everything Orcus had built. Cults on dozens of worlds were destroyed. Thanatos itself was invaded. For a century, Orcus could not appear in the abyss without facing assassination attempts coordinated by two heads who, for once, agreed on a target. Grazist, the Dark Prince, represents another threat. Unlike Orcus, whose approach is typically direct and brutal, Grazist operates through seduction, manipulation, and complex schemes. He is perhaps the most civilized and charming of all demon lords, which makes him no less dangerous, merely dangerous in different ways. His plots against Demogorgon are Byzantine in their complexity, often taking decades or centuries to come to fruition. Fraz-Urb'lu, the demon prince of deception, is another dedicated enemy. Demogorgon has attempted to conquer his realm on several occasions, and Fraz-Urb'lu responds with elaborate schemes designed to undermine Demogorgon's power. Their conflict is particularly insidious, as Fraz-Urb'lu excels at manipulation and delusion, constantly working to turn Amul and Hethradaya against each other more than they already are. But perhaps the enemy Demogorgon truly fears, if such a being can be said to fear anything, is Obox-Ob, the original prince of demons. This ancient Oberith lord precedes both Miska and Demogorgon in holding that title. Obox-Ob has vowed to murder Demogorgon and reclaim his position. And unlike Orcus and Grazist, Obox-Ob's hatred is patient and absolute. The Oberith Lord possesses knowledge and power that predate the gods themselves. His very existence represents a threat not just to Demogorgon, but to the entire order of modern demons. Demogorgon has made other enemies through sheer cruelty. He has enslaved Ugudenk, a being who was once a demon lord in his own right, ruling over primeval beasts and scaled nightmares. Now Ugudenk serves as a slave, his former power broken, his realm absorbed. The humiliation of this former peer demonstrates Demogorgon's willingness to completely destroy any demon lord who opposes him unsuccessfully, not through death, which would allow reformation, but through subjugation that lasts forever. The Prince of Demons has also had relationships, if that word can be applied to demons. He was romantically involved with Malcanthet, the succubus queen and demon princess of lust, but she readily manipulated him for her own advancement, and would betray him without hesitation if it served her purposes. More significantly, he had a relationship with tanar'ri, another powerful succubus demon lord. She too manipulated him, and her machinations eventually led to her imprisonment in the Wells of Darkness. Demogorgon's inability to maintain functional relationships, even by the low standards of demon lords, speaks to the way his dual nature undermines even his personal connections. How can you trust someone when they are always at war with themselves? On countless worlds across the material plane, cults worship the Prince of Demons. These are not well-adjusted people making reasonable choices. No one worships Demogorgon because they think it will work out for them. His cultists are the broken, the mad, the desperate. They come to him because something in their minds already echoes with the chaos he represents. They hear the whispers of two voices, always contradicting each other, and rather than running from that madness, they embrace it. The cults reflect their master's dual nature. They are always divided. Factions claim to serve the true will of Demogorgon, but some align with Amul's philosophy of patient destruction, while others embody Hephrodhiah's preference for immediate violence. These factions scheme against each other, undermine each other, sometimes slaughter each other in bloody internal purges. And somehow, despite this constant self-sabotage, the cults persist. They spread. They corrupt. Among the races, certain groups are particularly drawn to his worship. The Ixit-Sachitel, those evil manta-ray creatures, venerate him as their primary deity, drawing power from the abyss itself through their devotion. They dare not speak his name aloud, referring to him through epithets and symbols. Troglodytes know him as Amul-Ibor, the sibilant beast. The Yuan-Ti call him Siosivash and see parallels between his dual nature and their own hybrid forms. The Kuo-Toa, the mad fish folk of the Underdark, worship him as Li-Mug-Gugun, the Deep Father. Temples to Demogorgon are architecturally distinctive, always split in half, with one side representing Amul and the other representing Hephrodhiah. The division might be a simple line down the center of a single chamber, or might manifest as two completely separate buildings connected by a narrow passage. The rituals performed in these temples are bloody and chaotic affairs, with sacrifices killed in ways that inflict maximum suffering and terror. A priest of Pelor, who spent decades hunting Demogorgon cults, documented something disturbing in his final journal. I have destroyed 14 cells of the prince's worshippers, burned their temples, scattered their adherents, and in every case, within a decade, the cult had reformed somewhere else, different leaders, different members, but the same divided structure, the same warring factions. It's as if the cult is less an organization and more an infection. Cut out one tumor and another grows elsewhere. So why does any of this matter to the kids in the basement? Why did the Duffer brothers reach for this particular name? Because Demogorgon is iconic. Before there was a Stranger Things, before there was a show, Demogorgon was already famous in tabletop gaming circles. He appeared on the cover of the very first Monster Manual in 1977, one of the first images many players ever saw of what awaited them in this game. He was there at the beginning, lurking in the collective imagination of anyone who grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. When Mike Wheeler needed a name for the ultimate monster, for the thing that threatened Hawkins from beyond, Demogorgon was the name that came to mind. The show understood the weight of that name even if it didn't use the full mythology. By calling their creature Demogorgon, the Duffer Brothers were tapping into decades of fear, into a generation of nightmares shaped by late-night gaming sessions where the DM whispered that name and the room went quiet. They weren't using the lore. They were using the emotional resonance. Which version is scarier? The Stranger Things. Demogorgon is scary because it is alien and relentless. It comes from a place we don't understand. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't stop. These are primal fears, the predator in the dark, the thing that can't be reasoned with. But the D&D Demogorgon is scary for entirely different reasons. He's not scary because he can't be reasoned with. He's scary because he can be. Both heads are intelligent. Both can speak. Both can make promises, offer bargains, pretend to be allies. And then they'll betray you, not necessarily because of any malice toward you specifically, but because one head is always looking for ways to undermine the other, and you're just collateral damage in an eternal war. The Stranger Things. Monster is scary like a shark. Primal, simple, deadly. The D&D version is scary like a genius with a god complex, 2 warring personalities, and the power to reshape reality according to his divided will. There's also the matter of scale. In Stranger Things, Demogorgon is an individual threat. You can fight it, you can hurt it. 11 can banish it with her powers. The story is about children facing a monster and finding the courage to fight back. The D&D Demogorgon is not an individual threat. He's a systemic one. His cults operate on dozens of worlds. His plots unfold across centuries. His influence corrupts entire civilizations without them ever knowing the source. You don't fight Demogorgon the way you fight a monster. You fight him the way you fight entropy. And that's the real difference. The real reason the D&D version is worse. The Stranger Things. Demogorgon can be defeated. The story has an ending. The D&D Demogorgon cannot be truly defeated. There is no ending. Even if heroes of incredible power were to somehow destroy him, and it has happened temporarily, he would reform. The abyss would birth him again, 2 heads screaming at each other, crawling back from the chaos that made him. Because Demogorgon isn't just a monster. He's an idea. He's the embodiment of conflict that cannot be resolved, of madness that cannot be cured, of the chaos that lurks at the heart of existence. The Stranger Things. Monster is a character in a story. The D&D Demogorgon is the story that never ends. When those kids in the basement played their game, when they gave that name to the horror that would haunt Hawkins, they were reaching for something they probably didn't fully understand. They were invoking a legend. They were calling upon decades of fear, centuries of imagined history, an entire mythology of chaos and corruption. The show borrowed a name. The source material offers an education in terror, and if this story does what it should, you now carry a piece of that terror with you. Not the fear of a monster in the dark. That fear fades when you turn on the lights. But the more unsettling knowledge that somewhere, in the conceptual space where stories live, there is a being of 18 feet and 2 heads and endless contradictory malevolence. You know his name now. You know the Gaping Maw waits. You know that Amul is scheming and Heathrodaya is raging, and somewhere between them, the Prince of Demons watches with eyes that hypnotize and madden. The kids in Hawkins rolled dice against their Demogorgon. They named it. They fought it. In their game, in their story, they won. But dice work differently when you're rolling against the real thing. The Prince of Demons doesn't care about your heroism. He doesn't respect your courage. He has watched 100,000 heroes try to destroy him across countless millennia, and he's still there in his twin towers, two heads bickering while the multiverse trembles. And pray to whatever gods you trust that the two heads stay focused on each other. Because if Amul and Hethridiah ever truly unite, ever find something they hate more than they hate each other, the multiverse will learn what the title Prince of Demons really means. The Stranger Things. Demogorgon can kill a town. The real Demogorgon can kill everything. And somewhere in the infinite layers of the abyss, in the festering jungle where the trees whisper and the flowers bloom in colors that shouldn't exist, in the corrupted ocean where the Ixits-Achitl patrol and the Krakens wait, in the twin towers of Abysm that never quite touch, where Dagon whispers different secrets to each head, and Storauk screams eternally beneath the throne, he's waiting. Two heads. Two minds that hate each other more than anything else in existence, except perhaps the multiverse that dared to create them as one being. One eternal war within a single body, fought across eons, with no winner possible and no truce imaginable. And an endless hunger for whatever comes next.